would I go and visit with Remy Martin in Cognac and meet the Hérard de Broglie family?
Sounds like a worthwhile trip.
Well, indeed. So we set off from...
Stay in his chateau or something?
Well, we did. We stayed at... you're absolutely right. We jumped on the express from to Paris, and then we took the Paris-Bordeaux train to Cognac. Actually, to Angoulême. And it was nearly a disaster because we felt the lunch was so good and that we fell asleep. And somehow we woke up as the last bells were clinging for us to get off the train at Angoulême. And there was a bunch of Remy Martin people just on the platform waiting for us. So we would have then ended up in Bordeaux if we hadn't got off.
And probably with no deal.
Well, you're absolutely right. I would have blamed him. It's his fault.
Welcome back to the Whisky Legends podcast, where I speak to my granddad Tim Morrison about how the industry has developed over the last 100 years. In this episode, we hear about my granddad's trip to the owners of Remy Martin's Chateaux, where he secured a partnership that was to make Bowmore a global consumer brand, with further investment going into the single malt programme. We'll hear about some of the struggles and mistakes made over this period that made it difficult for things to take off, and about the first ever vintage malt whisky that may have saved the day. If you have any feedback or questions you'd like featured in future series, please leave them in the ratings or our YouTube and social channels, which you can find in the description. So in the last episode, we've kind of covered the UK and how you started to grow the Bowmore brand there. How did it start to get that global exposure?
It was fairly fortuitous because I had been asked to lunch by Michael Broadbent, who was responsible for the wines and spirits division of Christie's, the auctioneers.
Yeah.
And at that lunch, I had met a gentleman who represented Seagram's in the duty-free sector. And talking to him, it rather struck me that there might be an opportunity for us with Bowmore to go into this area, because duty-free was not a big thing at that time.
Right.
And I then phoned Michael and asked him if he could give me this gentleman's name card. And he asked me why, and I told him because I was, having spoken to him, it struck me that there might be an opportunity, as I said earlier, to approach the duty-free market, and him in particular. And he said, well, if that's what you're interested in, may I suggest there's another company that's also involved in this that is very well established, and I think that you would benefit more from meeting them if they were interested to take on your product. And that's a company called Reed Pine Campbell. And the gentleman there is Robin Archer. He's very much a wine man, but he is dealing with Remy Martin in the duty-free sector. So,
and were there many other whiskies within the duty-free sector at that point?
No.
None at all. So would you say you were one of the...
We were certainly one of the first.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
did you make a lot of money? I mean, what was the main objective for getting into duty-free?
The main objective for us to get into duty-free was obviously volume. 2 was the brand awareness, which would come with the volume,
the footfall,
and those were the 2 prime objectives.
Yeah.
But on the downside, the margins were not great.
Yeah.
Because first of all, our distributor would take his margin, and then British Airways took the margin from the product as well.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a lot left for us. But we did achieve volume and we did achieve brand awareness.
Yeah, because now you go through any airport and the whiskey section is absolutely enormous.
Unbelievable.
Free samples and almost like mini experiences and
That's
things
right.
like that. But you personally were actually one of the first people to do that.
That's right. Well, I tell you something that not long prior to this, in Terminal 2, the duty free shop was a hole in the wall. Literally.
Yeah.
It was a space behind this hole in the wall with some guy giving you a list of the products they had, and you tick that off, and the guy came back with a Johnny Walker bottle or a Remy Martin or a Martel, and that was your lot.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was, but it grew very quickly.
Yeah,
And
so once you had got it in, other people started to catch on quite fast.
Yeah, Glenfiddich obviously were there as well.
Yeah. And did it meet the objective in the exposure that it brought you?
What happened then was that I was in London, and we had been to a meeting with BAA, and when we came back to the offices, the gentleman who ran the whole duty-free division for Remy Martin was there, and we chatted away, and he knew what was going on. He was aware of Bowmore. He was an Englishman, so made life a lot easier. We didn't have to speak French all the time. And about 2 to 3 weeks later, I got a call from this guy, or rather from Robin Archer, to say that would I go and visit with Remy Martin in Cognac and meet the Hérard de Broye family.
Sounds like a worthwhile trip.
Well, indeed. So we set off from...
Stay in his chateau or something?
Well, we did. We stayed at... you're absolutely right. We jumped on the express from to Paris, and then we took the Paris-Bordeaux train to Cognac. Actually, to Angoulême. And it was nearly a disaster because we felt the lunch was so good and that we fell asleep. And somehow we woke up as the last bells were clinging for us to get off the train at Angoulême. And there was a bunch of Remy Martin people just on the platform waiting for us. So we would have then ended up in Bordeaux if we hadn't got off.
And probably with no deal.
Well, you're absolutely right. I would have blamed him. It was his fault.
So the lunch was good, or the wine was good?
Everything was good. It was just a wonderful experience. And I think a classic example of French hospitality.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the quality of catering and was just extraordinary.
Yeah.
And bloody comfortable.
Yeah.
And unfortunately made sleeping very much easier than it would have done.
So you managed to get off the
So we got off, and then we had a meeting the next day with the Hérard de Broye family, having been shown around Cognac and the small, and of course a Cognac distillery is a quarter, in fact about a 10% size of a Scotch whisky distillery.
Yeah, I don't even know what goes into Cognac.
Grapes.
Yeah.
And they mash it and stick it all in there and then distill it, and up comes the spirit and what have you. Easy stuff. But all very old, very, very old, probably older than Scotch whisky.
Okay.
And so we then had a meeting with the family, who said that they had been watching our progress with duty free, and would we be interested in a joint venture? And I said, well, the only thing I can do is go back to Glasgow and make a report on what has happened, and see what my board say about it. So, which I did, went back to Glasgow, and needless to say, they were excited about it. And we arranged to meet there. The area de Broys came to Islay and stayed with us for a couple of days. And what they thought of Bowmore, I don't know, because I mean it was the dirtiest, grottiest bloody
They
place.
weren't falling asleep on the ferry.
No, I don't think they fell asleep in the ferry.
What
In
food
fact,
did they get?
Funny, they drove from Cognac to Islay.
Why on earth would they do that?
Beyond me, I couldn't understand it. Anyway, I, as usual, flew out and we met them, and they stayed in the Bridgend Hotel, and we had a very nice, agreeable meeting and discussing various aspects, and came to Glasgow, met with our board, and agreed that we would have a full board meeting probably in a month or 2 months' time, which we did. And there was my chairman, myself, I don't know if my brother came, and one other director, and then we met the old man Eriard de Broy, and their marketing director, who was a very interesting Frenchman, a very Gallic personality, but one of the smartest marketing people I've ever come across.
Yeah.
He had been with Procter & Gamble before, and had a lot of successes in Europe with P&G products, and then moved into the booze business. And he was responsible for taking Remy Martin from an also ran brand to the number one cognac, and overtaking Martell and Hennessy.
Quite lucky to have him on board then.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we then agreed the joint partnership, joint venture. The basis behind it would be that they would be responsible for marketing and sales, and we would be responsible for production, and that I would be the liaison director, and we would meet on a regular basis with my guys, and they had a liaison director as well. And stage one was their marketing department said that we have to redesign the product. It's doing quite well at the moment, but if we're going to go for volume,
Yeah.
the one point I wanted to make was that, of course, now Bowmore was 10 years old,
Yeah.
so we had stock.
Yeah. It
And
wasn't like when you
it
first
wasn't
joined,
like,
didn't
no,
you? Yeah.
no. So if we were looking for a 10,000 case brand, or we had the stock for it.
Yeah.
And so that alleviated things, and the discussion, main financial discussion between the French lawyers and stroke accountants and our stroke accountant lawyers was the allocation of stock that was going to be given to this project. And so basically from 1975 it was going to be a 10-year-old whisky, and that having tasted a number of whiskies, they thought 10-year was probably the best. They said, look, we've got to go for volume to make this thing worthwhile. So we then laid out a sales plan, and let's say it was going from 2,500 cases, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000, 9,000, 10,000 cases. Well, then what you've got to do is determine how you apportion stock to those ages.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you realise you're needing a hell of a lot of whiskey.
Yeah.
Huge amount of whiskey.
Yeah.
Because you're allocating twice as much the second year, twice as much the third year, twice as much the fourth year. So we were probably talking of 100,000 gallons.
And comparative to the rest of the business, how much is that?
That was still...
Quite small.
It was, up 12, 14, 15%.
Yeah. But still
significant.
Quite significant comparative to...
Because that was our investment.
Yeah.
Because we were having to buy whiskey out of Stanley P. Morrison.
Yeah, exactly.
To go into the...
Because they could sell that elsewhere quite easily.
Yeah. So that whiskey then had to come into the joint venture.
Yeah.
And at the same time as that coming into the joint venture, we were distilling for 10 years, for the next 10 years.
Yeah. So it's a big commitment.
So it was a huge commitment for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then the next project was the repackaging of the brand, and their objective was to compete against Chivas Regal in the international marketplace, and package the product accordingly. So they used their own packaging people to design the new Bowmore, and as you've seen, the brown bottle and the gold label and the glitz on it.
So the company that your dad sold was now the main competition.
That was going to be aimed at as right.
But of course that was a blend.
That was a blend
at the time.
Absolutely.
So to actually have that as a competition with a single malt, does that work?
No, it didn't work, and that was the big mistake they made. And we told them that you cannot use the spirit. I mean, I used the example of Marmite. Not everybody likes Marmite. In fact, there's hellish few people like Marmite.
I doubt the French as well definitely didn't like Marmite.
No, I mean, but the guy's name was Yves Blanchard, and the liaison director was a fellow Jacques Paquet, who I got on very well with. I mean, Blanchard was something else. I mean, he was extraordinary man.
In
very
what way?
Colourful, intelligent, creative, amusing. But we found later. And always ready for a party. I mean, he was the last to go to his bed at night.
He sounds like a guy I want to know.
Well, he would drink. He would. I think you would feel worse than he did the next morning. So we said, we think you're making a mistake. And they said, no, we know what we are doing. We know the market, and we know how to get to that market. So off they went, used their designers, who was a fabulous fellow, or their department was a group of fabulous people. It was very interesting working with them. So they brought out the brown bottle with all the label and the bottle. Well, the next problem was we had to blow our own glass, because there was none of those. That bottle was to be a self-blown bottle. Mm-hmm. So I then had to take the mould of this to a glass manufacturer, and I must have gone to about 3, and all said, we can't do that. That's
to scale it up, you mean?
Yeah, bring it up so that we would produce 100,000 bottles or something like that.
Yeah.
So I eventually found a company in Kent, and they said, yeah, we think we can do this. So they did, and they were a fabulous company to work with. And then, of course, you've got to get capsules, and then then we had to go to a label manufacturer. And of course, the big difference in those days was that all labels were flat. You never had any embossing. And so I had to go to a label manufacturer that would emboss for me. And managed to find one, would you believe, in Maybole, which was extraordinary. And he was an incredible character. He was one of the most creative designer as well as producer. Because I'll maybe try and get one of the bottles out to show you exactly how difficult it was to do that. So this whole process of developing the package wasn't just a question of finding a bottle and sticking a label on it. And so we then went back to France, and the label wasn't what they wanted. The colours weren't right, the golds weren't right, what have you. They liked the bottle, but we had problems. And eventually they came to Maybole and talked to Ron, and he gets a rough idea, and then he basically then puts, because what used to happen was they would get a piece of glass and you would actually etch the label into the glass and then put metal over it, and that would give you your intonation.
Right, yeah.
And then the embossing would come out. I mean, it was so highly specialist, and there was really nothing like it in the industry at that time. And the number of people I'd gone to before, we can't do that.
Must have been quite a bit more expensive as well.
The packaging became very expensive.
And did that come out of your end?
That was all our part of the deal.
So Remy Martin's designed the beautiful bottle and then say...
Well, yes, I mean, basically what happened was, of course, that all those costs would go into the design cost, i.e. the cost of the label on the bottle, i.e. the dry goods cost in the overall cost of the case of Bowmore. So at least we were being paid for that from Remy Martin or the distributors.
Yeah.
So then we get everything right, and everybody's tickety-boo. We meet in London, and we go to the London duty-free symposium, and we let one or two people see the label, and they think, wow, this is great, this is a new product. But nobody tasted it. And then, of course, it goes into market research in New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, and comes out dead negative. And I might still have the what do you call them? Not texts, but that came before.
Facts.
That's right. We have a problem. Negative results in all markets.
Bloody hell. And are they usually quite accurate, these market research?
Yeah. And so so then we get more feedback, and basically the feedback was that the people who enjoyed the taste of Bowmore did not like the product because it was too modern, didn't relate to the product. And the people who liked the bottle hated the taste of the spirit.
Because it's just such a... it was peated
Marmite.
then, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So too heavy
so
for the nice fancy French bottle, basically.
Yeah. I mean, Bowmore was a middle-range Islay.
Yeah.
But I mean, still an Islay as opposed to a Highland or a blend, as it was supposed to be competing against, was way down the scale.
Yeah. And had you already started producing a lot of those bottles? So a lot... you were in
we were in hock here.
Yeah.
And the board met and said, right, we've got to go ahead.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to start, telling some stories that will make this work.
Yeah.
And so that started. And bearing in mind that we then appointed a UK agent. So he was happy, a Scottish agent. He was happy. And then it was up to Remy Martin to go out and
on the global scale.
On the global scale.
Yeah.
And then realised within a month that we had a problem, a real problem. And that was that the importing, distributing companies that Remy Martin had already had a whisky.
And what was that?
Hague. So
just a small
small barrier to us.
Yeah.
And so, and already the salesmen were getting feedback about the taste of the whisky in the bottle.
Right.
And
that's on a global scale.
That was on a global scale.
So each of these markets, one had anyone you tried to sell it to already had a contract with Hague.
That's right.
And everything was exclusive.
Yeah.
And number two, the French salesmen were getting fed up because no one liked it.
And they were losing patience with the brand.
Yeah.
And when we couldn't get a distributor in France, we've got a problem.
Yeah.
Haven't got a distributor in Germany, which is a huge market.
Mm-hmm.
Can't get a distributor in Hong Kong, which is a fantastic market.
Italy?
Italy, we had they found us a very small agent and very small sales. But quite nice people, but they were a young company that were, I think they were more Italian spirit orientated.
Yeah. So you were kind of lucky to get anyone at all.
Yeah, we
basically.
were, and we'd probably move about 100 cases
Yeah.
in the Italian market.
So Scandinavia, all the same, they mostly had Hague.
Well, the trouble was in Scandinavia, you have to go through the government.
Oh yeah, you said earlier.
So, and they limited the amount of a product that they would import from Scotland. They would say 40% of our spirit import will come from Scotland.
Yeah.
If you're not in that 40%, you've had it.
Yeah.
So that was that problem. And then, of course, the other problem was that, duty free, which was successful in the UK. Sales started going like that
because of the bottle.
Yeah.
So the partnership
was looking fraught.
Yeah, it didn't quite work out.
Yeah, no, it didn't.
So almost back to square one. Really,
we were almost back to square one by about 1977, and that's when we thought the saviour might be the bicentenary.
Yeah.
And so we still had we had a distributor in Germany, a small distributor, and that was probably 100 cases.
Yeah.
Guy in France, maybe 250 cases.
Yeah.
I had been responsible for getting that distributor. And then my brother got a distributor in Australia. And then Austria, we got a distributor.
But how, you were saying 100, 200 cases. What do you think that would have been had Hague not been there and had the bottle been a success?
Had a knot.
Yeah.
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 1,000, bearing in mind that would relate to the single malt sales, which initially you've got to measure it by.
Yeah.
But we weren't going to get 10,000 cases.
Yeah. So quite unlucky, really. I mean, in hindsight, do you think that maybe someone should have spoken to distributors in these places, or was that something that you thought that Remy Martin should have?
Well, they were the sales and the marketing people who said they would do the job. Yeah. And how would they do the job? They would take the product into their international distribution chain.
And that was the main reason for doing it.
Absolutely.
For you guys.
There's no other reason.
Yeah.
Because it took us as long to get those meagre results as it would have had we'd gone out ourselves.
Yeah.
And we'd said to each director, right, you're at Italy, you're France, you're Germany, you are you're Austria, you're somewhere else, and your job is to come back with a distributor and see how we can sell it. And we would all work as a team, but that never happened. Mm-hmm. And in fact, we still separated the bulk from the bottle.
Okay. So basically, as we said, they're back to square one, but then you had the bicentenary.
So then what happened was that we thought, well, the distillery is in 1979 is going to have its bicentenary. So what we will do, let's produce a bicentenary, and we'll charge the earth for it and have a very special package. Mm-hmm.
And did Remy Martin, you let them do that one?
They did a fantastic job with it. They did an incredible job.
Did that salvaged things?
It salvaged things for a while.
Yeah.
Because we were then able to move, and by this time, we had Remy Martin Amérique on board, so they were selling some Bowmore as well. Not a lot, but some. But they were very enthused about the bicentenary product. So we bottled up maybe about 1,000 cases. No, we didn't. It was probably about 500 cases. Mm-hmm. 1,000 cases of 6, that's what we did. And managed to move it into duty-free. The Remy Martin boys, Reed Pine, Campbell and London, were still doing a good job for us, as good a job as they could. I used to spend a lot of time out on the road trying to push it. Same in Ireland out there. The Bowmore package attracted a huge amount of attention, and we managed to basically move our allocation.
Nice. So that was one of the bottles, because you were just showing me these bottles before we came in to record in the shop through there. Mm-hmm. And there was one other one. And
then what happened thereafter, and this came about with a fellow, Mike Jenkins, who ran Reed Pine Campbell in London. And he said, what can we do about trying to get some sales up the sales? We're not making all that much progress. So we said, well, why don't we get maybe a white flint bottle, get a very, very elegant label put on it, a cork top, and make it a vintage. So we went to the designer, spoke to him about it, and he thought it would be very easy to do and have a very elegant box as well. Yeah. And that's what we did. And that's the bottle you saw up there.
Yeah. And was that one of the first vintage bottles out there?
Yeah, that was one of the first. I think that was the first, if you like, vintage malt whiskey products where we actually put the vintage on the label, not the age. And I think that first vintage was 1963. So basically by about 1980, we had come to a conclusion with Remy. Yeah. We were doing more to find ourselves agents than they were, and so we had a meeting with the family and said, look, this is not work, let's stuff it.
And were they okay about that? They understood?
They were okay about it, yeah. I mean, they weren't going to lose anything.
Yeah.
We had the we had the money up all front, you know, with
Yeah.
the whiskey and what have you.
And their salesmen had plenty of other Remy Martin successful brands
Absolutely.
already that were easier
Absolutely.
to shift.
Yeah. And so then we brought it basically back in-house and started to appoint our own distributors and retaining a number of the ones that we had already. So that's how things started to develop, and started building up from there. If you were interested, I'd show you a marketing plan.
I am interested.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll look at that later.
I'll bring it home.
Next episode, we'll talk about some of the new big players within single malt, the hosting of the Queen's visit to Islay and Bowmore, an interesting new opportunity through Glengarry, the unconventional purchase of Auchentoshan, and the eventual sale of the business to Suntory in the late 80s. If you have any feedback or questions you'd like featured in future series, please leave them in the ratings or our YouTube and social channels, which you can find in the description.